Ukraine's audacious drone attacks on Russian air bases this week have sent out a critical message to the Russian president. Russia's war in Ukraine is escalating even further, with little hope for a diplomatic breakthrough. Russian forces have been bombarding Ukrainian cities for weeks and appear to be preparing a major offensive in the Sumy region. Attacks are also intensifying along other parts of the front line. In response, Ukraine has launched a series of coordinated drone strikes this week targeting military airfields deep inside the Russian territory. Kyiv has also claimed responsibility for an attack on the strategically vital Crimean Bridge. So on to the point, our big question today is, Operation Spiderweb, is that a serious threat for Vladimir Putin? Hello and welcome to the Point. I'm Isha Bhatia-Sanan here in Berlin, and here are my guests. Alexandr Burilkov, he is the Assistant Director for Research at the GLOBSEC GeoTech Center and an expert on military and security issues in Russia, China, and the post-Soviet space. Roman Goncharenko, reporter from DW's Russian desk. And Eileen Matle, she is Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Security and Defense at the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP. A warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining. Eileen, if I could start with you. Now, Mr. Putin hasn't responded directly to the drone attacks, but he has called these terrorist attacks on the Russian side from Ukraine. Do you think Putin is panicking at the moment?
I don't think that his regime is seriously under threat. However, it does send quite a message to not only to the Kremlin, but also to the rest of the world, especially the West and Ukraine's military supporters, in the sense that Ukraine has once again been able to demonstrate that it can use very creative means in order to fend off the Russian attack and Russia's attack. And obviously Russia, sort of on a large scale and on average, is much more potent compared to Ukraine. So while I don't think that Russia is under threat or that the regime is under threat, I think it does remind Putin that he's not invincible.
Alexander, Trump has said that he's apparently had a 75 minutes long phone conversation with Putin, and that Putin has warned that he's going to respond. What is the response going to be like?
So what we can expect to see, I would say a likely scenario, because there is a range of scenarios, is something similar to what occurred earlier in the conflict when the Russians essentially field tested a major new weapon system, the audacious conventional intermediate-range ballistic missile, which is essentially an adaptation of a intermediate-range nuclear missile, the Rubezh missile. And we are likely to see another use of this missile, which is something that Ukrainian intelligence has, in fact, warned about, because hiding the preparations for such a launch is difficult, and it is also known from where it would launch in the Russian Federation, which is from Orenburg, where such missiles are stored. And so what we are likely to see is the demonstrative use of another one of these missiles, which are impossible to intercept with modern air defense and can be quite devastating against large targets. So for instance, last time that this was used, which was also the only time that such a missile has been used, it targeted a former Soviet air defense and missile factory in Dnipropetrovsk that is underground and therefore difficult to target with other weapon system. So this is one avenue that we are likely to see in terms of escalation and in terms of response.
Roman, you are from Ukraine. Now, this operation has taken more than a year and a half to be planned. And during this 1 year and a half, I'm sure Zelensky and his team must have also thought about the repercussions, as Alexander said, that this could happen. Are you worried?
Well, I'm not, because it's an all-out war for both sides. Ukraine is defending. Ukraine has no choice but to strike Russia where it's weak. and Russia was weak at those air bases because it thought that it is impossible for Ukraine to reach them. We have seen for the first time an attack in Siberia, which is very far away from the Ukrainian border. There were attempts before, but this is a very unique operation because we have multiple targets, and all those long-range bombers are unique because they were manufactured in the Soviet time. Russia cannot buy them. And Russia was using them to strike Ukrainian military targets, but also civilian targets. So Ukraine, by attacking those planes, by destroying them, actually made it more difficult for Russia to attack Ukraine. Of course, Russia has, some say, about 100 such planes, but as I've just said, they are not replaceable.
Or repairable.
Or repairable. And those bombers are actually built for nuclear use. So Russia will think twice now whether it wants to risk and lose more of them and be weakened in its nuclear power, or use them to launch conventional missiles against Ukraine.
It continues to be an all-out war, as you say, and meanwhile, negotiations and peace talks are now off the table. Delegations from Russia and Ukraine met in Istanbul for barely an hour this week. This was the first time since March 2022 that both countries had come face-to-face. But all they agreed on was to exchange more prisoners of war and return the bodies of dead soldiers. Meanwhile, the war continues to escalate.
Russia has been escalating its warfare in Ukraine again in recent weeks, with widespread missile attacks and more drones than ever before. A lot of civilians have lost their lives, also in Sumy. According to analysts, around 200 settlements in the border region have already been evacuated. Ukrainian sources claim that a big Russian offensive is underway there. Meanwhile, Ukraine managed to pull off an unexpected strike against Russian warplanes. The Ukrainian security service SBU attacked at least 4 Russian military bases simultaneously, partly deep inside the country as far as Siberia. At least an estimated 12 aircraft were destroyed, yet the numbers are disputed and vary considerably. Still, President Zelensky speaks of an absolutely brilliant result of the so-called spiderweb operation.
Russia must feel what its losses mean. That is what will push it toward diplomacy.
The security service SBU reported another attack with explosives on the Crimean Bridge. How is Russia reacting?
Alexander, how is Russia reacting? Is a nuclear escalation a possibility?
That's unlikely. From the Russian perspective, as was mentioned earlier, they are in process of launching a major new offensive in the north, in the Sumy region. This is a logical step from a military perspective because this is exactly the theater where the Kursk operation was fought. So the infrastructure for a major push is already in place. And at the same time, they continue to push along the front line, especially in the southern Donbass region, which was still vulnerable after the capture of Avdiivka some time ago. And so from the Russian perspective, the loss of these bombers, which is, of course, significant from a strategic perspective, from a nuclear deterrent perspective, is not one that alters the dynamics on the ground. And at the end of the day, this conflict is a land war, and that means that it is decided on the ground. And so there is no reason from the Russian perspective to abandon the initiative that they have gained at such a high cost, because losses have been, of course, considerable. And that means that we are likely to see renewed and escalated pushes all along the front line, trying to find a place and a time to properly break through Ukrainian defenses if possible and restore the dynamics of the very early part of the conflict, where Russian advances were considerable.
Eileen, where do you see diplomacy in this new situation? Because Zelensky is saying that this is the only way to push Putin towards diplomacy. Putin has said, how can we have diplomacy? How can we at all talk to a country which is bombing us right now? So what's really happening?
Obviously, it is very cynical of Putin because it is Putin's Russia that is attacking Ukraine, and that has attacked Ukraine in the first place and already starting in 2014. But nevertheless, I don't see a huge window of opportunity for diplomatic pushes at the moment. while we saw talks occur earlier this week, nothing major came from it, and I don't think that anybody expected any major breakthroughs. And even the US President Donald Trump has just yesterday admitted that he doesn't think that a peace or that talks in that regard will happen anytime soon. So I think we're still in a sort of stalemate, and what I think is now very vital and important for especially Western supporters of Ukraine is to continue supporting Ukraine in order to back up the country and to prepare the country for other major offensive, sort of an offensive push that will most likely be coming very soon from Russia.
So we're just going to see a continuous war. What do you think Ukraine's strategy is exactly, Roman?
Well, I think Ukrainian strategy is to force Russia to end this war, and the only means that I think is realistic is to make it a stalemate. We are not there yet. Russia is still attacking.
But Zelensky, sorry to interrupt you, but Zelensky has said that we'll continue attacking. Does Ukraine have the capacity to continue attacking?
Well, Ukraine has the capacity to strike Russia deep inside its territory. So these are pointed attacks that are weakening the Russian force, the Russian army in general. But Ukraine is not in a position to strike a major blow that will force Russia to end this war anytime soon. So it is a process, and it is a long process, because Russia is planning for a longer war. We are now hearing also from the Russian representatives during those talks in Istanbul that Russia is ready to continue for years. And it is at least 1 or 2 years, I would think. Russia thinks it is strong enough to do just the same. So attacking. And we were talking about the consequences of that Ukrainian strike against Russian military air bases. And you've asked about a possible nuclear response. I don't think as well that there will be one. We cannot exclude that. But on the other hand, I think Russia might try again to do some kind of nuclear saber rattling, or making some kind of test, just like a missile launch, new type of missile, or anything of that kind, putting its nuclear forces on high alert. Why? To intimidate the West in the first place, because the West is the major supplier of weapons to Ukraine. If the West is weak and is afraid of Russian nuclear forces, Russia hopes that the flow of arms to Ukraine would be slowed down. And this is the Russian aim.
But isn't Russia been trying to intimidate the West for the last 3 years now?
Certainly. And of course, it has not really borne fruit in terms of, perhaps it has in terms of slowing down the supply of new systems, but at the end of the day, practically everything has been provided. Cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, armored vehicles, all things that discussions were had about. And so I think that what the Russians might be hoping is for intimidation and to sow discord. But at the same time, their strategy is clearly one that is preparing and is prepared for an attritional conflict and realizes that this is a long process, and that abandoning the initiative in any way at this point would lead to a stalemate. And so they have no choice from their perspective but to continue maximum pressure.
Ukraine claims that it has disabled 34% of cruise missile bombers in key Russian air bases. Now, after that loss, does that reduce the time span, since both of you have been talking about at least a year or two? With these kind of losses, can we expect the war to not prolong as much as people had expected before the attacks?
Well, first of all, the estimates that we're hearing about are mostly coming from Ukraine, and independent experts have assessed that the loss might not be as high as claimed by Ukrainians. But nevertheless, I think it's been at least not only a symbolic but also a material loss and blow to Russia. But whether that will be the sort of the game changer in the war, I'm really doubtful about, especially because we should also bear in mind that supplies are still coming from other countries, most importantly from North Korea, and that stream of especially ammunition is not going to be reduced anytime soon, especially because the West does not have any, or has not found any ways as of yet to stop those deliveries.
So symbolically, yes. And what about Putin's image in Russia? How has this affected his image?
It has showed his weakness. We've seen this a couple of times before, but he's still in a position to say, look, we are still a nuclear power. We can still, we have still a bigger army. We are stronger. So I do not think that this is a very serious damage to his image inside Russia itself. But on the other hand, the frustration is growing. So his military understands that it is not that strong that it believed to be. And it's a long process of negging on Russia's self-esteem, in its belief in its strength. So it is important for Russia now to maybe draw some resources that it was using against Ukraine to defend its airfields and other objects. They are now searching all the lorries in Russia, fearing other attacks from Ukraine, because those drones were hidden in lorries.
And it's been a great intelligence failure.
Absolutely. So Russian intelligence can make big mistakes, and this is a new development.
Right. So the Russian president is having to deal with pressure both on the domestic front and internationally. The US Congress, led by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, is working on drastic sanctions on Russia.
We have 82 United States senators co-sponsoring legislation that would impose bone-breaking sanctions not only on Russia, but those countries that buy Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other products. 70% of all Russian oil is bought by China and India.
Alexander, 500% tariff on goods imported from countries that buy Russian oil. How are India and China going to react to this?
When it comes to China, the relationship with Washington is not in a good place. But the Chinese so far have not reacted in a way that has really committed them to the conflict, unlike the North Koreans or even the Iranians. India is another question, and I think a much more important one in many ways, because India, unlike China, is a country that is a major power, but tries to maintain good relationships with everyone and all around. And it's also a country that the US has long courted in recent years to try to find a strong partner in the Indo-Pacific. It has included it in the Quad, for instance, and targeting a fundamental import for the Indian economy is likely to backfire. And this is also coming at a time when India itself emerged from skirmishes with Pakistan that were more serious than in a long time, including the loss of precious jets.
Right.
And at such a moment, putting that kind of pressure on New Delhi is quite likely to backfire. And by the way, one of the reasons why this has not been implemented by the US before, because pressuring the global south is a very risky strategy, diplomatically speaking.
And how is Europe going to react to this? Friedrich Merz is going to US. He's going to meet Trump on Friday. Do you think sanctions are going to be discussed there as well?
I would be surprised if they were not discussed. I mean, those sanctions will most likely come up in discussions. But I would like to add that the plan, the bill, is structured in a way that it would exempt countries that are supporting Ukraine, including militarily. So the bulk of European countries, I think, would not have to fear to be targeted by those sanctions. There are obviously countries like Hungary, for example, that are still importing Russian energy and at the same time not supporting Ukraine, to say the least. But I think given that ideologically speaking, Trump and Orban are very closely aligned, I would be surprised if they wouldn't find a sort of loophole to work around those sanctions.
And Friedrich Merz believes that Ukraine is defending Europe. And hence, during Zelensky's recent visit to Berlin, Merz had pledged a new aid package worth 5 billion euros. Now, Merz appears determined to continue supporting Ukraine and is even planning defense industry cooperation.
Germany wants to finance the production of long-range weapons in Ukraine. Chancellor Merz has made this commitment to President Zelensky with the prospect of a joint production.
Es wird hierbei keine
There will be no restrictions on the range. Ukraine can defend itself completely with this, also against military targets outside its own territory. According to Zelensky, Ukraine already produces 40% of its own weapons, from artillery shells to drones. But for now, especially as far as air defense is concerned, the country is still reliant on Western systems like the Iris-T. Further consignments form part of the new German €5 billion aid package. Germany will also shoulder a large part of the costs for Elon Musk's Starlink system, which is of great importance to the Ukrainian army. Yet, how soon will Ukraine benefit from these armaments cooperations?
Roman, is it too late?
Well, it is, but it's an important move and it's a new quality. How soon can Ukraine benefit? Well, according to the German Defense Ministry, in a few weeks. They are investing already in drones that are being produced in Ukraine. So they can be delivered. Those systems have been tested and used already by the Ukrainian army. I think it might take a while to develop new types of drones, more sophisticated, longer range, also missiles. So as far as I understand, Germany is investing in drones and missile production in Ukraine. It is important for Ukraine that also German military industry will be involved in that process. That might take time. Of course, Ukraine wishes that it had happened before, but it's a start. And it's important that Germany is following other countries that have already started, like Denmark, for example, investing in the military production in Ukraine itself, which would make it also more independent should any political, governments come and go in Europe and elsewhere. And we have seen on an example of the United States that a flow of arms can be stopped. That's why production inside Ukraine makes Ukraine more resistible to Russian pressure.
And how has Ukraine managed to produce drones at this scale? For the last 3 years, Ukraine is war-torn, and yet the production seems very impressive.
So, of course, significant credit has to go both to Zelensky's government and the Ukrainian people themselves for mobilizing society to a war footing. Ukraine also enjoys certain unique advantages when it comes to industrial infrastructure that has been left over from the Soviet times that makes it possible to scale up defense industry. And not only that, since Ukraine was the industrial heartland of the Soviet Union, much of it is buried deep and highly protected from Russian strikes in a way that enables production to continue using dedicated infrastructure even under bombardment. So there are multiple factors that have gone into this and have enabled Ukraine to resist. And of course, as Roman pointed out, Ukraine is becoming increasingly self-reliant in that, which is truly a critical step. And in many ways, this collaboration between Ukraine and Europe is invaluable to both sides. At the end of the day, one needs to recognize that Ukraine and, unfortunately speaking, Russia have something that no other country on the planet has, and that is a direct experience of pure conflict and very deep experience of pure conflict. And Ukraine's relationship with Europe is one where this is invaluable for European countries that do not have this experience in any way.
And is Europe thinking of changing its strategy? I mean, for the last 3 years, we've been talking about tanks, we've been talking about missiles, we've been talking about jets being sent, we've been talking about billions of dollars being invested. But what we see this week is that there are drones which don't really cost much, and they've caused enough damage to Russia. So keeping that in mind, is there a change in strategy at all that is being discussed?
I mean, on part of Western supporters, I don't necessarily, or not necessarily able to delineate a new strategy. I mean, what we hear, especially here in Germany, is that now Chancellor Merz is talking about whatever it takes, right? Not as long as it takes, which I think can make a difference in terms of Germany and other Europeans being really dedicated to support Ukraine and to continue supporting Ukraine. However, I wouldn't, while, again, it has served quite a significant blow to Putin and his regime, the recent drone attacks. I wouldn't completely overestimate the impact because, as has already been pointed out, the the majority of the war is being fought on the ground, which also means that you need systems that are also designated for ground and for land warfare. And at the same time, I would say that Ukraine needs a steady supply of all those systems combined and not just one system, because one system alone is not going to change the war.
And when Chancellor Merz is in the States this Friday and he talks to Trump, we'll have to see whether he's able to convince him of things that others haven't managed to do so far, because Trump's tweet or his message on Truth Social didn't really feel like he's convinced that there's going to be peace anytime soon. What do you think? If you're watching us on YouTube, do let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'll be reading. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.